Bet you got some great stories.
A couple. Any of them true? A few. First man I hunted was back when I was riding with Billy the Kid.
You knew Billy the Kid?
Silas Greaves' story is ridiculous, but something about the unapologetic way he tells it makes me wish it was true. Juarez Gunslinger isn't just a shoot-'em-up, it's a love letter to the Old West we see in the movies, the Hollywood Old West. There's something about dusty streets, gunfights, the untamed land that sparks the imagination. I grew up on Old West lore, and that said, I knew almost all of the true events to the story long before the game was released. But to see them woven into one man's revenge story is fascinating, if not a little absurd.
You challenged him to a showdown.
You read that in a dime novel?
But this is what legends are made of.
It said he showed no fear as he took your measure with eyes like a rattlesnake.
Obviously, the actual Wild West wasn't like its mythological portrayal. Truth is, a lot of people were ambushed and shot unaware. Duels, as we see them in movies or games, never existed. Life was hard, dangerous, far more complicated than good guys and bad guys. Now Silas, he claims to have more or less tamed the West himself, gun in hand. His stories also lean into a lot of legends created by movies and authors. Silas seems like he knows the truth and that his story is silly. By the end, you could assume it was all made up. Or maybe he was just telling partial truths. When Silas begins his story, he is working with Billy the Kid to find Roscoe Bob Bryant, one of the men who killed his brothers. After being arrested alongside Billy by Pat Garrett... Wait, sorry. It has occurred to me that throwing all these names out here might just be gibberish, so let me tell you a story.
Billy the Kid, or Henry McCarthy, sometimes known as William H. Bonney, was born in 1859. He was orphaned at the age of 15 and began his life of crime shortly thereafter. This next part of the story most people know from movies. He began working for John Tunstall. John and his partner, Alexander McSween, were having a political spat with a local group of businessmen who aimed to control the cattle trade in the area. McSween owed a large sum to one of the businessmen, and the sheriff ordered their cattle to be seized to pay the debt. As the posse came to take the cattle, Tunstall intercepted them and was fatally shot. This ignited a conflict called the Lincoln County War. Whether the war itself was just a justification for Billy to lean into his violent tendencies or an attempt at redemption is hard to say. However, the amount of violence committed as a result made Billy an outlaw. Sheriff Pat Garrett began to search for the kid and eventually captured him. Billy was eventually moved back to Lincoln, where his famous escape attempt took place. More or less, the deputy, Bob Ollinger, went across the street to feed some of the prisoners, leaving another deputy to look after Billy. Billy claimed he needed to use the outhouse, and on the way back, attacked the deputy and shot him. He then broke into Garrett's office, finding Ollinger's shotgun, and used it to ambush Ollinger as he raced back to the jail. After escaping, he was hunted down by Garrett, who eventually ended his outlaw career.
Now, Silas tells a whole different story, one where Billy escaped and left the aftermath for Greaves to sort out. Silas even mentioned the apparently famous shotgun in his own escape, shooting his way out of town until finally having to duel with Ollinger.
I killed him in a fair fight. Everybody saw I had no damn choice.
Silas and his audience also leans into the idea that Garrett was a cowardly assassin with a tin star, less so the lawman that he was. You see, there was a weird glorification of the outlaws in the Wild West and a tendency for people to write about them as like folk heroes, not unlike Robin Hood. This often skimmed over a lot of the deaths that they caused, making them seem like unfortunate free spirits in a harsh time. An underdog pulling one over on the man, if you will. Let's be clear, he was a violent man who robbed and hurt others, not his romanticized depiction. Silas then goes on to explain how he joined the Ruales to fight against the cowboy gang. He first tracks down Newman Clanton, who tries to fend off Silas with a Gatling gun, but is ultimately unsuccessful. Apparently, the gang assumed that Wyatt Earp had tracked down Clanton. Yes, this is the very same gang that is famous for warring with the king of Wild West lawmen, Wyatt Earp. Silas then explains he did the same with Curly Bill Brochus, again having it being blamed on the Earps, and he even claims the legendary myth of Johnny Ringo's last standoff. But wait, I'm doing it again. I think it's story time.
Once upon a time, there was a gang of cattle rustlers called the Cowboys. They would typically steal cattle and take them from Arizona to sell them in Mexico. Between jobs, most of the gang would spend their money in the town of Tombstone. In late 1887, the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Morgan, and Virgil, and their wives, moved to Tombstone. They had no real interest in continuing their careers in law enforcement, but rather to become businessmen. Very soon, the two groups, including the famous Doc Holliday, began butting heads. This culminated in some of the cowboys threatening the Earp group, who met them near the OK Corral, where they exchanged gunfire. Afterwards, there was an all-out war between the two groups until Morgan Earp was assassinated and Virgil was grievously wounded. Wyatt and his close friends would then attack any cowboy on sight. As the legend goes, Johnny Ringo, one of the last cowboy higher-ups, was finally hunted down, and depending on the source, was either attacked by Wyatt, Doc, or one of their other friends. However, officially, he took his own life, according to the evidence.
Or did he? Because according to Silas, he was the one who found Ringo, was the one that gunned him down.
Sorry I had to ruin the legend for you, boy. But the legend ain't always true.
Then again, he attributes himself to dismantling Henry Plummer and his gang, the Innocents.
Henry Plummer died.
Though funny enough, he does admit a failure to duel John Wesley Hardin. Though in Hardin's drunken state, he is able to be arrested. Hardin is known to be an extremely dangerous shootist, especially because of his uniquely fast quick-draw technique. So there is a bit of humility on Silas's end here, admitting that one of the most dangerous outlaws he wasn't able to just find and gun down.
Didn't count his shots, and now he was at my mercy.
He then claims to have been in Coffeyville when the Dalton gang famously robbed two banks in the same town on the same day, where he gets into a large shootout with one of the brothers and a 2-on-1 duel with the elder two brothers.
They got it wrong.
He then tracks down and has another duel with Kid Curry, who gives him another hint as to where Roscoe Bob Bryant is, though he finds out that Bob has fled with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid down to South America.
I demanded to know the whereabouts of Roscoe Bob Bryant. He shouted at me. Is that what this is about? Bob went with Butch and Sundance to South America. You ain't never finding him. Those were his last words.
Silas then tells us that he tracked down Jesse and Frank James to go after Jim Reed some years earlier. Reed being the other man who hung him and his two brothers. After Jesse gets away, he ends up tracking down Frank and blowing up his cabin, there interrogating him as to whereabouts of Reed. He then defeats the remnants of the gang before dueling with Reed, and as the game points out, Frank would still be alive at this time, and Jesse was killed by Robert Ford. Ooh, I feel another story coming on.
Ah yes, the story of Jesse James. The James brothers, as well as the younger brothers, were born in Missouri. Despite the state wishing to remain neutral during the Civil War, groups of bushwhackers formed to harass the Union forces. The James and younger brothers joined these groups and would fight on the Confederate side even after the conclusion of the war. Specifically, after the war, some of these groups became outlaws who would wreak havoc on the reforming southern states. Thus, the James Younger Gang was born. They quickly became famous for their ability to rob trains, and some saw these men as freedom fighters who were fighting against the unjust Union. In reality, they were a ruthless gang who slowly over time lost and gained members as violence escalated. Eventually, the James gang split after Frank and James parted ways after their gang population began to dwindle. Jesse, however, wanted to restart his gang, part of which were the Ford brothers. Jesse had become paranoid and moved into the brothers' home for protection. As the government and railroad companies put up a $10,000 bounty for the arrest and conviction of either James brother, which is over $300,000 in today's money, Robert met with the governor and came up with a plan. Before they could arrest him, the Ford brothers suspected Jesse of becoming wise to their plan, and one morning, after breakfast, Robert dispatched Jesse from behind as Jesse was cleaning a picture on the fireplace mantel. The Fords were rewarded with this effort with a first-degree murder charge, but were pardoned by the governor. They then toured for a while before a supporter of Jesse and his legendary status as a Confederate rebel fatally ambushed Robert in his own tent saloon with a shotgun, and as you can imagine, Ford did not make it.
Ultimately, it is revealed that Silas has told his audience this story because actually, the man he has been hunting since the beginning sits just across from him at the table. It is then up to the player to decide if Silas spares him or guns him down. So of course I gunned him down and avenged Silas's brothers.
Oh my God! Oh Jesus!
All in all, this is truly more than just some arcade shooter. However, as an arcade shooter, it is a pretty solid one, and despite its age, it still holds up. The story itself is wild, but that leads us to some really fun scenarios that without the exaggeration of the truth would not have been as impactful. What other game can place the same man with nearly every famous outlaw in the West? Surely it's no Red Dead, but with the lack of titles in the Western gaming genre, it scratches a certain itch. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you more than I can express. The journey is just starting, and thank you again for coming along. Please like and subscribe for more just like this. Professor Gibernathy out.